This story, Buying Back the Babe, is one that I first wrote in 1999. I updated it several times over the next few years. And the last time that I was able to perform it was in 2004. I'd been invited to tell a story as part of a scary story concert in October. And to me, the scariest thing about October was the Red Sox. So I decided that I would tell the story. And I haven't needed to tell it since. But I thought that given the events of this month, that I would tell it to you now. It was midnight in late September, and the group of rowdy drinkers decided to call it a night. They left the bar, still celebrating, and the bartender reached up, he switched off the TV. The celebrators had been there because the Red Sox had just clinched a wild card spot and would be heading to the playoffs for the 4th consecutive year. Now the bartender was giving the bar one last swipe with his rag when the door jingled open again and in came a young man. The bartender felt a cloud of cold mist come in with him. He looked past the young man at the doorway and saw a mist rising up in the gutters. "Here it comes," he said. "Here what comes?" said the young man. "El Bambino," said the bartender. "El Nino?" "No, kid. El Bambino." "Never heard of it," said the young man, sliding onto the bar stool. The bartender turned to look at him for the first time. "You're not from around here, are you?" "No, just got here from Montana," said the young man. "Can I get a beer?" "I think I'll join you," said the bartender. And he pulled 2 beers at the tap and he slid onto the stool next to the young man. The bartender talked for the next 30 minutes about the 1918 world champion Red Sox and their hero, Babe Ruth, who was sold by their team's owner, Harry Frazee, to the New York Yankees so that he could back his Broadway production of No, No, Nanette. And the Red Sox hadn't won the World Series since. They'd come close, but they hadn't quite been able to go all the way. "It's a curse," said the bartender. "It's the Bambino." "You don't really believe that, do you?" said the young man. "Believe it? I believe it like I believe there's going to be a traffic jam on the expressway tomorrow night at 6. I've seen it too many times. Guys like the ones who were in here earlier, celebrating, cheering, saying things like, 'This is the year!' Well, next week, they'll be in here every night watching the games with rosary beads hanging out of their pockets, while their wives are down at Our Lady of Perpetual Underachiever saying a novena. And still, the ball will roll between the infielders' legs. It's a curse, I tell you. It's that white mist rising up out of the gutters out there. Soon it'll be enveloping the entire northeast corner of the country. It's the Bambino. He's still pissed." The young man finished his beer and he took a bill out of his pocket and put it down on the bar. "Here," he said, "maybe you can buy back the Babe." He turned to walk out the door. "Thanks for the history lesson," he called. The bartender stared at that bill for a long time after the young man was gone. Buy back the Babe, he thought. Yeah, buy back the Babe. The next day when the bar opened, there was a beer mug on the counter with a piece of paper taped to it, on which the bartender had written the words, "Buy back the Babe." The first man who sat down at the bar asked what it was all about, and the bartender told him the story and the young man's parting remarks. "What the heck," the guy said. He took out a dollar bill, and he wrote the words, "Buy back the Babe," on the margin of the bill, and he put it into the mug. The guy sitting next to him did the same thing. That evening, everyone who came into the bar heard the story, and they all decided to put a dollar bill into that mug. Later that night, 2 men sitting at the bar happened to be reporters from the Worcester Telegram, and when they heard the bartender's story, they ran the story in the next morning's edition. And that afternoon, reporters from the Boston Globe, the Herald, and the New York Times were waiting for the bartender. About an hour later, the Times was on the phone to George Steinbrenner's office at Yankee Stadium. "Hey, Mr. Steinbrenner, how would you feel about selling Babe Ruth's contract back to the Red Sox now?" "That's a bunch of hooey," Steinbrenner said. "Those people just have to face the fact that they're not fielding a team good enough to beat the Yankees." Well, the Red Sox fans knew that that wasn't true. The Sox had swept the Yankees in New York and had won the season series. There was a lot more going on than could be explained by players' stats and records. Something really interesting was happening in Boston. Every day, people poured into the bar to put dollar bills into that mug, and the mail was full of hundreds of envelopes containing dollar bills that said, "Buy back the Babe," on the margin. every day, people looked at those words, "Buy back the babe," and something began to grow. And it was more than just hope. It was full-blown optimism, not for next year, for this year. Well, as the fates would have it, the Red Sox won their divisional series and would be heading into the league championship series against the Yankees. The Yankees started out strong as usual, taking the first 2 games. The Red Sox came back and won the next 3, and the series moved back to New York. The Yankees won, forcing a 7th game. And that 7th game was something else. It was a typical seesaw game. This game was tied 4 times before the Red Sox finally won in the 12th inning, thanks to a pinch hit, a throwing error, and a walk-off steal. The Red Sox would be going to the World Series. About an hour after the game, a reporter asked George Steinbrenner, "Well, how do you feel about selling the Babe's contract now?" "Oh, though he can have it for $1 for all I care. He hasn't produced anything for us." And so, the next day, he received a registered letter in the mail at home. It read, "Dear Mr. Steinbrenner, please find enclosed $1 for the sale of the contract of George Herman Babe Ruth." Signed, the fans of the Boston Red Sox. So the World Series began in Boston on a night that was so fog enshrouded you couldn't see the Prudential Building a mere few blocks away. Now everyone in the park knew that the deal had been done. But the question on everybody's mind was, how are we going to let the Babe know that we've bought him back? The score was tied 0-0 through 6 innings. And the bottom of the 6th, as the Red Sox came up, the stalwart fans out in the right field bleachers began their first attempt at getting the wave to pass through Fenway. They stood and raised their arms over their heads and called that single syllable like Fonzie on steroids, "Hey!" It doesn't go very far the first time. I don't know if you've ever been to Fenway Park to see this, but just a smattering of people stand and raise their arms over their heads, and so the fans in the bleachers start again. "Hey!" they all called, and finally it began to move around the right field corner, and those of us sitting out by the pesky foul pole could hear that as those people stood and raised their arms over their heads, they were calling, "Babe!" This time, when it started again, it made it around the right field corner and down toward first base where it died at stubborn Section 8. But the folks in the bleachers were not to be deterred, and again they stood, they raised their arms over their heads and called, "Babe!" This time it went around the right field corner, down past first base, around the screen behind home plate, up the third base line, skipped over the top of the green monster and back to the bleachers where it started again. Around and around it went, each time the chorus growing louder and louder, "Babe!" Everyone called. It went around so long and got so loud that the players in the field stopped and stared in amazement. The Red Sox batter stepped out of the batter's box, put down his bat, raised his arms over his head and called, "Babe!" as he swept his arms toward to the ground. The player in the on-deck circle did the same. The entire Red Sox team came out of the dugout, stood on the top step, and together they raised their arms and called, "Babe!" The sound grew louder and louder, and time seemed to stop. The sound of 35,000 voices pierced through that mist. The sky cleared, revealing a full moon that shone there like a baseball on opening day. The Red Sox batter picked up his bat, stepped back into the batter's box, and sent the next pitch sailing into the bullpen for the first home run of the season. The sky over Boston was a little bluer that week, the air a little clearer, and spirits could not have been higher. And the bartender began making plans for all those dollar bills he'd been collecting. You see, he had a cousin who was a sculptor. And that's where the statue came from, the bronze statue of Babe Ruth that stands on the concourse outside of Fenway Park, right underneath the banner that reads, "Boston Red Sox, 2004 World Champions." Thank you. Now, as I told you earlier, the last time I was able to tell that was in 2004. And the afternoon of that performance happened to be the day that the Red Sox were down 3-0 to the Yankees. Wow. And went on that evening to win the first of 4 that they won in a row, and then went on to win the World Series. Now, I'm not saying that I'm responsible for that, but I think that a little story magic might have been at work there, so I thought I would bring it again.
All right.
Thanks.